The air inside the Texas University Stadium shimmered with late-morning heat and the noise of thousands of families celebrating. Banners fluttered, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the distance, a marching band played a triumphal tune that felt too bright for the heaviness in my chest. I had rehearsed my speech 100 times, yet my palms still trembled against the edge of the podium. When they announced my name, I stepped forward into the light robe, brushing the polished wood heart, steadying itself with each breath. Behind me, the massive screen projected my face 10 feet tall. My voice shook at first, but then it found rhythm. I spoke about innovation, about the power of building machines that could heal instead of harm. I said that technology should serve people, not pride. The audience clapped. Somewhere in the front row, I saw my mother pressing her hands together, smiling in that practiced way that said, "Keep it polite, Clara." Beside her, my father sat with his chin lifted, the gleam of a corporate king, inspecting a product he had already purchased. Ethan. My brother leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes unreadable. For a moment, I believed the day might pass without incident. Then, from behind the stage, I heard the first sound that would split my life in 2 heavy footsteps striking the wooden ramp. A voice rose raw and furious, echoing across the loudspeakers. "You think you can shame us?" It was Ethan. The crowd's laughter faded to murmurs. I froze, gripping the sides of the podium. He emerged into the sunlight, his graduation suit half unbuttoned, his face red. In his hand glinted something metallic, a baseball bat polished to silver engraved with the company crest of Whitman Iron and Steel. My heart stuttered. I saw the security guards hesitate, unsure if this was part of the ceremony. My mother stood shouting his name, but he kept coming. "You will not make us a joke, Clara," he yelled. Not in front of them. I managed to say, "Ethan, put it down," but the microphone carried my words across the entire stadium, thin and fragile. The wind carried the smell of cut grass and hot metal. My father did not move. His jaw locked, his eyes cold. The silence grew until even the banners stopped rustling. Ethan stepped onto the stage. The bat caught the sunlight like a mirror. I could see my own reflection in its curve, small and terrified. "You were supposed to join us," he said, "not betray us with those outsiders." I took one slow step back. "This is my life," I whispered, "not the family's brand." He laughed, a dry sound that sliced through the air. "You think you're better than us? You think walking away makes you pure?" The crowd murmured, people standing phones lifting instinctively. Someone shouted for security, but it was too late. Ethan's face twisted and he swung. The sound that followed was not like what movies teach you. It was sharp or real, the crack of bone meeting metal. Pain detonated through my ribs, white-hot and endless. I fell sideways, air fleeing my lungs, microphone clattering to the floor with a screech that pierced the speakers. Gasps rippled through the stands. My vision fractured into fragments of light, a child crying, a man, recording my mother's hands covering her mouth. The world tilted. I tasted blood, iron, and salt, and the stage smelled of varnish and heat. Somewhere far away, I heard the shriek of sirens. Ethan stood over me, chest heaving, the bat still in his grip. For a second, I saw confusion flicker in his eyes, as if even he couldn't believe what he had done. Then my father's voice thundered across the chaos. "Enough! Get her out of here!" He wasn't shouting in fear, he was shouting in control. 2 security guards rushed forward, finally moving, tackling Ethan to the ground as the audience erupted. My mother screamed his name, her pearls scattering onto the floor as she tried to reach him. The bat rolled to the edge of the stage, clinking against the metal frame. I tried to breathe, but the pain stabbed deeper each time. The crowd blurred into a storm of faces, some horrified, some still holding up their phones. A girl in the front row whispered, "Oh my God, is she alive?" The cameras caught everything, the blood spreading through my gown the moment my father turned his back. The confusion of the paramedics pushing through the crowd. Hands lifted me onto a stretcher. The sky above was impossibly blue. As they carried me down the ramp, flashes burst like lightning. My brother's voice echoed behind me, muffled by distance and sirens. "You ruined everything." My father shouted something I would never forget. "You brought this on yourself." The words sliced deeper than the fracture in my ribs. My eyes blurred, but I caught one last glimpse of the stadium, a place meant for celebration, turned into a crime scene. A cameraman followed as the ambulance doors closed. Inside, the world narrowed to the rhythmic beep of my heart monitor and the ache that pulsed with every bump in the road. A paramedic leaned over me, his voice calm but urgent. "Stay with us, ma'am. You're going to be okay." I wanted to laugh, but the pain held me silent. I stared at the ceiling lights sliding past one after another like fragments of a broken spotlight. I realized something then, that everything I had built to escape my family's shadow had just been dragged back into it live for the entire world to see. Outside, a news drone hovered, broadcasting the ambulance's path. The paramedic adjusted my oxygen mask and said, "You're trending already. Somebody filmed the whole thing." My throat tightened. "Good," I whispered through the hiss of air. "Let them see." Because for 30 years, my family's power had been a shield that hid every bruise, every silence, every threat. But not this time. This time, the steel cracked. I turned my head, slightly wincing as pain radiated through my chest. Through the ambulance window, the stadium receded behind us, surrounded by flashing lights and the roar of disbelief. My breath came shallow, my ribs screaming with every rise and fall, but my mind was sharp. For the first time, the truth was no longer trapped inside the walls of our mansion or buried beneath my father's influence. It was out there in every phone, every screen, every witness. The blood on my robe would dry, but the stain on their legacy would not. And as the siren wailed toward Houston General, I made myself a promise. That swing would not define my pain. It would define their downfall. I was born into the sound of metal. The first lullaby I remember was the clanging rhythm of hammers from the Whitman steel foundry behind our house. My father called it music. To him, the hiss of molten iron was proof that control could be shaped by heat and force. He believed people were like, "Steel bend them while they are young, or they will break you later." My earliest memory of him is standing in the doorway of his office, the air thick with cigar smoke, while he lectured a foreman who had missed a shipment deadline. "Steel doesn't make excuses," he said. "Neither should you." I learned young that feelings were weakness, and silence was safety. My mother lived by those rules too. She was beautiful in the way polished marble is beautiful, cold, smooth, reflective. Her smile never reached her eyes. She hosted charity galas and spoke softly about family values, but at night, when she thought no one was listening, I heard her whispering apologies to God through the bathroom door. She had mastered the art of surviving without living. Ethan, my brother, was different. From the moment he could walk, my father put tools in his hands. By the time he was 10, he was helping inspect furnaces. They called him the heir. At dinner, my father toasted to the future of Whitman Iron and Steel, raising his glass toward Ethan. I learned to keep my hands folded in my lap. If I spoke too loudly, the air in the room would freeze. I once asked what my future would be. My father's reply was sharp as a blade. "You will make us proud by being pleasant and proper." That's enough. I pretended to agree. But I loved machines. I loved the way gears turned truthfully, never pretending. When I was 13, I sneaked into the foundry after hours. The floor was hot, shimmering under the orange light of the furnaces. I found scraps of metal and welded them together using a torch that weighed more than I did. It wasn't perfect, but by sunrise I had built a small mechanical arm that could lift a wrench. For me, it was magic proof that creation didn't need permission. That morning, my father caught me showing it to our driver. Without a word, he grabbed the arm, slammed it onto the concrete, and crushed it with his boot. "Do you want to die in a factory?" he shouted. "You are not a boy." Then he turned to the driver. "If you ever encourage her again, you're fired." He walked away, leaving me with the sound of metal twisting apart. My mother came out an hour later holding a cup of tea, pretending not to notice the blood on my fingers. "Your father only wants to protect you," she said. Protection, I learned, meant obedience. After that, I stopped building openly. I studied in secret. Every night, I copied diagrams from engineering magazines, sketching with a flashlight under the covers. I built smaller things, motors from old fan circuits from broken radios. It was my hidden rebellion. Ethan mocked me. You play with scraps, he'd say. I'll inherit an empire. He didn't need to earn affection. It was handed to him like a crown. My father took him on business trips, taught him golf, told him he was born for greatness. When Ethan failed an exam, father laughed it off. When I earned perfect grades, he said, "Don't get arrogant. Men don't like that." I learned that praise in our house was currency, and I was broke. The older I got, the clearer the hierarchy became. At 16, Ethan received a brand new truck for his birthday, complete with the family logo etched into the doors. That same week, I was given a pearl necklace that wasn't even mine. It had belonged to my grandmother. "This will remind you of where you come from," Mother said. It felt like a leash disguised as jewelry. One winter night, I overheard my parents arguing. My father's voice was low but venomous. "She's too independent. You need to rein her in before she embarrasses us." My mother's whisper cracked. "She's a child." "She's a liability," he replied. I pressed my ear to the door until my heartbeat drowned their words. The next morning, he was all smiles, and she served pancakes as if nothing had been said. That was the rhythm of our family love as performance, peace as silence, anger as law. When Ethan pushed me in the garage and my arm slammed into a steel beam, I screamed. The bone snapped clean and quick. Father came running, but instead of rage, there was amusement in his eyes. "Accidents happen," he said. Ethan mumbled an apology that sounded more like pride. That night, while my arm sat in a cast, I wrote my first note to myself. "Remember this pain. It is proof you are real." The house itself was a museum to power mahogany walls lined with photographs of men in suits shaking hands beside furnaces. No one smiled in those pictures. They looked like conquerors. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if I simply disappeared if one day they came downstairs to find the dining chair empty. Would they even notice, or would they just hire someone to keep my place polished? At school, teachers praised my precision. I joined science clubs, won competitions, and was told I had a mechanical mind. When the National Robotics Contest announced finalists, my design for a self-balancing drone was chosen. The local paper wanted a photo of the Whitman daughter young inventor. My father refused. "No publicity without family approval," he said. "You represent us, not yourself." The article ran anyway without the photo, but the name was enough. That week, I was grounded for disrespect. Mother said it was for my own good. By then, I understood that her version of love was submission polished into habit. Yet in the quiet hours, she would slip into my room, trace the cast on my arm, and whisper, "I'm sorry." She never said for what. Years later, those whispers would haunt me more than my father's shouting. The sound of guilt without action is a chain that never rusts. I grew up believing escape was impossible, but I also grew up believing machines tell the truth. Steel bends under pressure, but it never lies about where it breaks. I decided I would not either. From the outside, we were the Whitmans' wealthy, respected the kind of family whose name was printed on libraries and hospital wings. Inside, we were a furnace that never cooled. My father forged Ethan into an heir and me into a ghost. By the time I graduated high school, I could map the entire factory floor in my mind, but not a single safe corner of my home. People said we were lucky. I said nothing. The day I received my acceptance letter to MIT, I stood in the driveway holding it like a flare in the dark. My father looked up from his newspaper and asked, "What will that degree give you that this family can't?" I answered quietly. "Freedom?" He laughed. "Freedom doesn't pay dividends." But I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Fear, because he knew I had found a crack in the steel. For a long time, I convinced myself that invisibility was safety. If I spoke softly, moved quietly, and smiled on command, then maybe the storm would pass over me. My father measured worth by obedience, and Ethan was his perfect reflection. He was loud, charming, careless, and always forgiven. I was careful, quiet, deliberate, and always wrong. When I won the National Science Scholarship, my teachers cried and my classmates cheered. At home, my father only said, "Good, it'll make a nice headline for the company." My mother added, "Don't let it make you arrogant." Ethan patted my shoulder like he was humoring a child. "Congrats, Clara." Guess even you can surprise us sometimes. I smiled because that's what Whitmans do in public. That night, when I brought the acceptance letter to dinner, my father folded it neatly and tucked it into his briefcase without asking. "I'll keep this for you," he said. No need to flaunt it. It felt like he was confiscating proof that I existed. Later, I found the letter in his office drawer under a pile of contracts. I didn't take it back. I wanted to see how long it would take him to realize I'd stopped trying. The answer was never. Ethan grew into his inheritance. By his 20s, he was already a fixture in company meetings, walking through the foundry in tailored suits, while men twice his age called him Sir. My father treated him like a prince and me like an obligation. I was the polished daughter at charity events, the one who smiled beside my mother in matching dresses, while the press wrote about the Whitman family's enduring legacy. In those photos, I was always slightly out of focus, standing half a step behind them. At home, I tried to carve a place for myself in smaller ways. I cooked cleaned, managed charity spreadsheets, trying to make myself useful. My mother thanked me with the same tone she used for the maid. My father rarely addressed me unless he needed someone to organize files or deliver documents. Ethan only noticed me when he needed someone to blame. Once during a board meeting, he lost an important contract and told my father it was because I'd sent the wrong draft. I hadn't touched the files. My father believed him anyway. "If you want to be part of this family, start paying attention," he barked. I swallowed the protest. To argue was to invite worse. The next morning, Ethan brought me coffee like nothing had happened. "You're too sensitive," he said, laughing. "You know how Dad gets." I learned to laugh too. That was how survival looked in our house, smiling through the bruise. Ethan's violence began small. A shove here, a slammed door there. When I confronted him once after he insulted a factory worker, he grabbed my wrist and squeezed until my skin burned. "You don't correct me," he hissed. "You're nothing without this name." I pulled free, but the bruise lasted a week. My mother saw it and said softly, "He didn't mean it." I wanted to ask her how she knew. I began keeping a notebook hidden under the floorboard of my room. In it, I wrote everything, dates, incidents, words they said. I didn't know why. Maybe because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Maybe because part of me already knew that one day I would need evidence to survive. When I felt helpless, I wrote equations beside the entries: force, velocity, fracture, stress. Numbers made pain measurable, something I could understand. Once, Ethan found the notebook. He laughed and tore a page out. "Planning a lawsuit already," he said. He tossed it into the fireplace and watched it burn. "You really are dramatic." My father saw the ashes and told me to stop acting out. My mother told me to pray. The firelight reflected in her eyes like confession. I stopped writing for a while, but I didn't stop watching. Every time Ethan raised his voice at the factory, every time my father humiliated an employee in front of others, every time my mother pretended not to see it all went into the memory vault I was building inside me. I didn't know yet that memory could be armor. The nights in the Whitman mansion were long and echoing. The foundry behind the property hummed 24 hours a day. The windows rattled with each strike of machinery, like the house itself was haunted by its own creation. Sometimes I would stand at my window and watch the sparks fly in the dark, imagining they were stars that refused to stay silent. I whispered to them the words I couldn't say out loud. "One day I'll be gone. One day I'll be more than this." But leaving required courage, and courage was something my father called rebellion. He used to say steel must be contained. Otherwise, it loses form. What he meant was, I must be contained. When I received my first university offer and early acceptance to Caltech, I brought the letter to him, heart-pounding. He didn't even read it. "You'll attend business school," he said, "something useful for the family." "Engineering is useful," I said quietly. He looked at me like I had sworn in church. "Engineering is for men who build, not for women who distract them." My mother looked down at her plate. Ethan grinned and said, "Don't worry, Clara. I'll build enough for both of us." That night, I cried into my pillow for the first time in years. I wasn't crying because I'd lost the argument. I was crying because I realized there was no argument to win. In that house, logic was treason. The next day, I applied for more scholarships in secret. The silence became my weapon. Every insult I endured was a deposit in a bank I planned to cash later. When Ethan mocked my nerd obsession, I smiled and helped him with his math homework, all while submitting my essays to MIT and Stanford. When my father said, "You'll never survive without this family," I thanked him for the advice and hid another acceptance letter under my mattress. I learned to survive by being invisible, but invisibility also gave me freedom to move without notice. In their arrogance, they didn't see the cracks forming under their empire. They didn't see me preparing to leave. The night before I left for Boston, I stood in the garage surrounded by the scent of oil and metal. I ran my fingers over the dent in the steel beam where Ethan had once slammed me. My ribs ached at the memory. I whispered, "You didn't break me." For the first time, I believed it. The next morning, my father loaded Ethan's golf clubs into the trunk of the car and told me to keep my voice down when saying goodbye. "There's no need to make a scene," he said. "Your brother has a meeting at 10. I nodded, carrying my single suitcase. My mother kissed my cheek without eye contact. Ethan honked the horn impatient. As the car pulled away, the mansion shrank behind me, and with it, the noise of the foundry faded into a low hum. I pressed my forehead against the window and exhaled. The air outside tasted different, cold, sharp, alive. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the beginning of a plan. Boston didn't sound like home. It sounded alive. The first morning, I woke in the dorm at MIT. I heard the low rumble of trains, the shuffle of students, and the constant hum of energy that never existed in Texas. It smelled like rain and metal and coffee, not smoke from the furnaces. For the first time, the air didn't taste like someone else's empire. I walked across campus with a backpack heavier than anything I'd ever carried and felt the strange lightness of being unseen. No one knew the Whitman name here. No one cared who my father was. When professors called roll, they just said, "Clara." I wasn't the invisible daughter or the disappointing child. I was a student, and for the first time, that was enough. The workload was brutal. Nights blurred into mornings, labs into lectures. I lived on instant noodles and adrenaline, but exhaustion was a kind of joy. Every equation I solved, every circuit that sparked to life, reminded me that my mind was not something to hide. During my second semester, I met Dr. Rafael Marquez, a visiting professor known for designing robotic prosthetics for war veterans. He was the first person to look at my sketches and not say too ambitious. He said, "You think like a builder." I told him I'd been told not to. He smiled. Then, "They're afraid of your fire." I joined his research team, spending nights in a lab that smelled of solder and ozone, surrounded by metal arms and blinking LEDs. For the first time, the sound of machinery didn't hurt, it healed. I found family in the hum of progress. My team didn't see me as fragile. They saw me as precise, relentless driven. I stayed in the lab through snowstorms, soldering circuits with numb fingers. When prototypes failed, I didn't cry. I recalibrated. It was the kind of pain that built, not destroyed. Every line of code was a rebellion, every test flight a refusal. I began to understand that freedom wasn't absence of pain. It was choosing what you suffered for. The further I excelled, the more the ghosts of Texas followed. My father's emails arrived like clockwork. Subject lines, family meeting, legacy, return. The body of each one was colder than the last. The family name is being forgotten. Your brother is under pressure. You owe us your loyalty. It's time you came home and earned your keep. My mother's messages were softer, but worse. Your father is worried. Ethan misses you. Please, Clara, come back for the holidays. Guilt written in cursive. I ignored most of them until one arrived marked urgent. It was a scanned article. Whitman Iron and Steel sponsors MIT Innovation Lab. My father's company logo glared from the page. They were trying to stake their claim on my new world. I confronted Dr. Marquez in panic. "They're buying their way in." He studied the logo and said quietly, "Let them try. You don't owe them anything." His certainty steadied me. "If they try to use your name," he added, "you use your mind." That became my mantra. My breakthroughs multiplied. Our robotics team developed an exoskeleton design that restored motion to partially paralyzed patients. The project caught attention from Sol Edge Robotics, a clean energy firm that wanted to merge sustainable tech with assistive engineering. Their CEO, Helena Yates, invited me to consult. When she learned my background, she said only, "Your father built machines for power. You build them for healing. Don't ever forget that difference." I signed a contract with Sol Edge after graduation, refusing every Whitman offer that followed. The salary was generous, but the true payment was peace. I rented a small apartment with brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. It smelled like paint and new beginnings. I slept without nightmares for the first time in years. For months, I lived quietly working 12-hour days designing robotic components, ignoring every family email. But silence doesn't erase control, it only makes it louder when it returns. On my 27th message unread, my mother called. Her voice trembled between love and manipulation. "Your father is sick," she said. "He needs you." I hesitated. I still remembered the sound of the bat crushing my robot when I was 13, the smell of burnt metal. "Is he really sick?" I asked, "or just losing control?" She sighed. "Do you have to be cruel?" I wanted to say he taught me how. Instead, I said I was busy. She whispered, "Family is all we have, Clara." I hung up before she could make me doubt it. After that, the messages shifted tone. Ethan began writing, pretending to be friendly. "Proud of what you've done. You've made Dad's name proud. Come home sometime. The old man misses you." I didn't reply, but I started sleeping with my phone on silent, afraid of what I'd hear if I didn't. It was Dr. Marquez who saw the fatigue in my eyes. "You're doing everything right," he said. "You don't have to apologize for surviving." He offered me a piece of advice I'd carry forever. Families like that don't forgive, they recruit. Stay free. 2 years later, MIT invited me back to deliver a commencement speech. I hesitated but accepted. I wanted closure or maybe defiance. I wrote a speech about innovation independence and truth. I didn't realize how much it would cost me. When I told my parents I would be speaking, the emails became sugar-coated. "We're proud. Can't wait to see you. Come home for dinner after." I should have recognized the patterned kindness before the strike. When I landed in Texas the night before graduation, the air felt heavy again, thick with heat and memory. My father greeted me at the airport in a perfectly pressed suit. His smile was brittle, mechanical. "My daughter, the genius," he said. "Maybe now you'll put that brain to use for something that matters." I wanted to turn back then, but pride anchored me. My mother hugged me tightly, her perfume suffocating, her whisper sharp. "Don't embarrass us tomorrow." Dinner that night was at the old country club where the Whitman name was engraved on every wall. The staff bowed. My father ordered steak for everyone without asking preferences. Between wine toasts and false laughter, he raised his glass. "Tomorrow, my daughter will announce that she's joining Whitman Iron and Steel as our new head of automation." Applause filled the table. My fork clattered against the plate. "Excuse me," I said. He smiled. "A surprise announcement. The press will love it." My heart pounded. I never agreed to that. Ethan smirked. "Come on, Clara. It's time to come home." My voice was steady. "No. I already accepted a position with Sol Edge Robotics." Silence spread like a shockwave. My mother's smile vanished. My father's eyes darkened. "You will not disgrace this family in public." "Then don't force me in public," I said. The table went still. He leaned closer, voice low. "You owe us everything." I set my napkin down and met his gaze. "Then I'll owe you nothing." I stood the chair, scraping across the marble floor. As I walked out, I could feel every pair of eyes on me burning holes in my back. I didn't look back, but I heard Ethan mutter, "She'll regret that." He was wrong. That night, I didn't regret. I only prepared. When I returned to Texas for the ceremony, the sky looked too blue to be real. The air shimmered with heat, heavy with magnolia and pretense. My mother insisted on picking me up from the hotel herself, claiming my father was tied up with press calls. She arrived in her silver sedan, polished to perfection pearls, glinting in the sunlight. "Everyone is so proud of you," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded, watching the dry fields rush by outside the window. I hadn't been back in years, but everything felt suspended in time, like the house itself had been waiting to swallow me again. The Whitman estate stood at the edge of the industrial district, its white columns stained faintly with soot from the foundry. The moment we turned into the driveway, I felt my lungs tighten. The air carried the metallic tang of iron and memory. Inside, nothing had changed. The same leather chairs, the same portraits of men staring down from the walls as if guarding their legacy. Ethan was waiting in the foyer, arms wide. "Look who decided to come home," he said, flashing the grin that made strangers trust him. He handed me a bouquet of red roses wrapped in silver foil. "I'm proud of you, sis." For a second, I believed him. The warmth in his voice was almost human. "Thank you," I said cautiously. "It means a lot." He laughed. "Don't sound so surprised. We're family." That word landed like a warning. At dinner, the long oak table gleamed beneath the chandelier. My father sat at the head, his expression carved from granite. "Clara," he said, "tomorrow is an important day. We've invited press investors and board members. It will be the biggest event since your grandfather's retirement." I glanced between them. "It's a graduation, not a board meeting." He smiled coldly. "For you, perhaps. For the Whitmans, it's a chance to show unity." My mother reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "Your father just wants people to see how far you've come." There was something pleading in her touch, as though she knew what was coming and wanted forgiveness in advance. "We even had your speech printed," my father continued. "All you have to do is read it." He slid a folded page toward me. The header bore the company logo. My stomach tightened as I scanned the words, "I am honored to carry forward the Whitman iron and steel legacy through technological innovation and family devotion." I set it down. "I'm not reading that." His gaze darkened. "It's already been approved by the PR team." "Then you can read it yourself," I said. Ethan chuckled. "Don't be dramatic, Clara. Just smile for the cameras." "This isn't your stage," I said. His smirk vanished. "It's always our stage," he replied softly, and I realized he wasn't talking about tomorrow. He was talking about every room, every choice, every breath I'd ever taken. After dinner, I went upstairs to my old room. It still smelled of dust and lavender the bed made with precision. On the dresser sat a framed photo of Ethan and me as children smiling beside a pile of molten scrap at the foundry. My arm was wrapped around his waist, his hand gripping my shoulder hard enough to bruise. I turned the frame face down. As I unpacked, I noticed my phone vibrating text messages from an unknown number. "Be careful tomorrow. They're planning something." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. When I called back, the number was disconnected. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps, every gust of wind a warning. Around 3 a.m., I went downstairs for water and found my father in his office, the glow of his computer reflecting off his glasses. He didn't look up. "You should rest," he said. "You'll need to look presentable in the morning." "I'm not giving your speech," I said quietly. His hands froze over the keyboard. "Clara, you've always misunderstood loyalty. You think it's a choice. It's not." I stepped closer. "Loyalty isn't silence, and it isn't slavery." He laughed, low and cold. "You talk like a child who's read too many manifestos. When the cameras are on, you'll do what's expected. That's what Whitmans do. And if I don't," his eyes lifted, then sharp and glittering, "then you'll be nothing, and nothing doesn't survive long." I turned to leave, but his voice followed me down the hall. "Don't humiliate this family again, Clara. We made you." I wanted to scream that they'd only forged me through pain, that they had no idea what I'd become. Instead, I closed my door, locked it, and pressed my back against it, shaking. At dawn, the house buzzed with preparations. Florists arranged white lilies in the entryway. A catering truck idled outside. I dressed in a navy gown and a cap embroidered with the university seal, my hair pinned tight. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like the woman they wanted me to be: controlled, polished, silent. But under the fabric, the fire still burned. My mother knocked softly before we left. "You can still change your mind," she whispered. "You don't have to fight him." "He's been fighting me since I was born," I said. "I'm just finally hitting back." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing more. At the university, the stadium gleamed beneath the rising sun. Rows of chairs filled the field banners, waving cameras lining the aisles. My father and Ethan took seats in the front row, surrounded by board members and investors. I stood backstage, microphone in hand, waiting for my name to be called. The MC's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Clara Whitman, our distinguished graduate and the future of Whitman Iron and Steel." Applause erupted. My stomach knotted. I stepped into the light, each step deliberate, every breath measured. The stage stretched before me like a battlefield. I looked down at my father. His nod was a command, not encouragement. I smiled tightly and adjusted the microphone. "Thank you," I began. "It's an honor to be here, surrounded by so much history." My voice steadied as I went off script. But history isn't destiny. Sometimes to honor its past, we have to refuse its chains. A ripple went through the crowd. My father's face stiffened. "I stand here not as a representative of Whitman Iron and Steel, but as an engineer dedicated to the future, one built on clean energy, not smoke. On innovation, not inheritance." Murmurs swelled. I caught Ethan's glare. My father's jaw clenched. Cameras flashed. I took a breath, my pulse hammering. "Starting next month, I'll be joining SolEdge Robotics to develop sustainable automation technologies. I hope to prove that progress doesn't require pollution or pain." The applause began hesitantly, then grew. Students cheered. Faculty smiled. But I saw my father rise slowly, fury cutting through his composure. Beside him, my mother's hands trembled in her lap. Ethan disappeared from his chair. The air shifted tense and electric. Somewhere behind me, I heard the scrape of metal. The crowd's applause sounded like distant thunder, uneven and uncertain. The sun glared off the silver railings, and for a moment, the entire stadium seemed to hold its breath. I stood at the podium, heart racing, the microphone trembling slightly in my hand. My words had already left the stage, traveling through speakers and cameras, impossible to take back. I looked at my father. His face had frozen into a mask of disbelief that was already curdling into rage. My mother sat beside him, pale as marble, her fingers clutched around her purse as if it were a shield. Ethan's chair was empty. A cold ripple ran down my spine. Behind the crowd's noise, I could hear the faint metallic rhythm of footsteps on concrete somewhere backstage. Slow, deliberate, heavier than anyone else's. I forced myself to keep speaking, to fill the air with words before fear filled it first. "Change," I said into the mic, "isn't betrayal, it's survival." My voice echoed through the speakers, steadier than I felt. The audience, half unsure, began to clap again. I smiled, but my eyes searched the side aisles. I could see shadows moving near the edge of the stage. For too long, I continued. I believed loyalty meant silence, but silence only keeps old wounds from healing. The crowd leaned in, sensing tension without knowing why. Then a voice broke through the air, deep, furious, unmistakable. "You call this loyalty?" The words came from the edge of the platform, sharp enough to slice through applause. Heads turned. Ethan stepped into the sunlight. His navy suit wrinkled, his tie askew, his jaw set in fury. The metallic glint in his right hand caught the light, an engraved steel baseball bat, the Whitman Iron and Steel logo carved near the handle. My stomach turned to ice. Security at the far end of the field hesitated, confused by the interruption, thinking it was part of the event. Ethan's footsteps echoed across the platform, slow and deliberate. "You think you can shame us?" he shouted, his voice magnified by the still active mic. The crowd's murmurs swelled into gasps. "Ethan!" My mother's scream carried from the front row, brittle and useless. My father didn't move. His jaw clenched tighter. "Get off the stage," I said, stepping back, trying to sound calm. "This isn't about you. Everything is about me," he snapped, voice cracking with fury. "You were supposed to stand beside us, not spit on the name that built you." The bat gleamed like liquid fire. I took another step back, the edge of the stage pressing against my heel. "Ethan, listen to me," I said, my tone even but my pulse thrashing. "Put it down. There are cameras. You don't want to. You think these people matter more than blood," he shouted, cutting me off. "You think your machines make you better than us." The crowd began to stand, people whispering, phones rising, recording. The heat pressed down like a weight, and I could taste dust and fear. "Ethan, stop." I tried again, quieter this time, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were wild red at the edges. "You betrayed us!" he hissed, taking one more step forward. "You betrayed Dad!" I glanced toward my father, hoping absurdly that he would intervene. But he didn't move. His eyes stayed on me, not with concern, but with command, as if daring me not to cry, not to falter, not to disgrace the family one last time. "You're not proving anything," I said, voice shaking now. "You're just showing them what we really are." "No," Ethan said, raising the bat. "I'm showing them what happens when you forget where you came from." The air split. I didn't even see the swing, just the blur of metal and sunlight, the hollow sound of impact that cracked like thunder. Pain exploded through my ribs, radiating outward until the world went white. My legs folded beneath me. The microphone hit the stage with a screech that shrieked through the speakers. The audience gasped, then screamed. "Stop," someone yelled. "Call security." I tasted blood, metallic and hot, flooding my mouth. My vision fractured into shards of light and motion, students backing away, faculty frozen in disbelief, phones trembling in hands. My mother's cry echoed across the stadium, her voice breaking. Ethan stood above me, chest heaving, his grip tightening on the bat as if he couldn't believe what he'd done. The camera drones circled, capturing everything, the blood on the stage, the emblem on the bat, the look in his eyes. I tried to breathe, but each inhale sent fire through my chest. I reached for the microphone, my fingers trembling, and somehow the speakers caught my whisper. "This is what loyalty looks like in our family." Then I collapsed. Pandemonium erupted. The dean ran forward, shouting for medics. Security swarmed the stage at last, tackling Ethan, pulling the bat from his hands. He fought them, shouting, "She deserved it. She humiliated us." My father finally stood, shouting orders, trying to control what could no longer be controlled. His voice was swallowed by the chaos. The crowd surged toward the railings, reporters snapping photos, students sobbing. I could hear the faint buzz of a drone overhead broadcasting the scene live. My mother climbed the steps, her heels clicking against the wood, screaming my name. "Clara, Clara." I felt her hands on my face, cold, trembling. The smell of her perfume mixed with the iron of my own blood. "Stay with me," she whispered over and over like a prayer. "Stay with me." My body felt weightless, untethered. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't obey. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her. It was the truth. Paramedics appeared, their voices urgent. "Multiple rib fractures, possible internal bleeding, get the stretcher." I was lifted, the sky spinning above me. As they carried me down the steps, flashes from cameras exploded like lightning. The sirens grew louder, drowning out the chaos until all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding against the pain. Over the wail of sirens, I heard my father's voice again, shouting to someone, maybe to the press, maybe to the police. She brought this on herself. The words echoed inside my skull. My eyelids fluttered, the sunlight blinding. Somewhere far away, I heard the crowd chanting, some angry, some horrified. The world blurred into red and white and sound. Inside the ambulance, a medic placed an oxygen mask over my mouth. "You're safe," he said. "You're going to be okay." But even as the doors slammed shut, I knew that safety was an illusion. I had exposed the truth, but truth always demands payment. And as the sirens wailed, carrying me away from the stage, I realized the cost had just been collected. The inside of the ambulance was a blur of flashing red light, antiseptic air, and shouted instructions that barely reached my mind. Pain was everywhere, flooding in waves so sharp they erased thought. Each bump in the road sent a shock through my ribs like electricity. But beneath the agony there was something colder, quieter, a strange, detached awareness that this moment would never leave me. I could taste blood through the oxygen mask, feel it drying on my chin. The paramedic beside me counted under his breath. Pulse steady, BP dropping. "Stay with me, miss." I wanted to answer, but the air refused to come. Every breath felt like pulling glass into my lungs. I closed my eyes and saw the flash of the bat again, the arc of sunlight, the look of hatred on Ethan's face. The sound of it, that dry, violent crack, echoed through my skull louder than the siren. When the ambulance doors swung open at Houston General, the world was chaos. Reporters had already gathered outside their cameras, flashing like gunfire. Security tried to push them back, shouting orders. Someone yelled my name. Someone else screamed for space. They wheeled me inside, and I caught glimpses of the television in the waiting area, already looping shaky footage from the stadium, the title in bold white letters across the screen. Graduate attacked by brother during commencement. My entire life reduced to a headline before the blood had even dried. In the ER, bright lights seared my eyes. Voices overlapped, nurses calling for imaging, a doctor ordering pain relief, another counting ribs. 2 fractures confirmed. Possible puncture near the lung. I drifted in and out, surfacing long enough to hear someone say, "She's trending on every platform." I thought I imagined it until I heard the next voice, firm, official. "Police are stationed outside. The assailant's in custody." A hand brushed my shoulder, gentle but grounding. "You're safe now." Safe. The word meant nothing. I wasn't sure I even believed in safety anymore. As the anesthesia pulled me under, I thought of my father's voice echoing across the stage. She brought this on herself. That sentence would haunt me long after the bruises healed. When I woke again, the room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. My chest was wrapped tightly, every inhale reminding me I was still alive. The blinds were drawn, but I could see the glow of phone screens outside the window. Reporters waiting like vultures. My mother sat in the corner, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. When she realized I was awake, she rushed to my side. "Clara," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he—" I turned my head away, wincing. "You always knew." The silence that followed was heavier than the bandages. She cried quietly, one hand hovering near mine, but never touching. When she finally left, the nurse closed the door and said softly, "The video's everywhere. The police want your statement, but they said you can rest first. How many have seen it?" I asked, my voice rasping. "Millions," she said. Hashtag Steel and Blood is all over Twitter. News channels are calling it the fall of the Whitmans. I stared at the ceiling, the hum of the hospital lights steady above me. For years, my family's violence had been a private kingdom. Now it was public property. I should have felt humiliated. Instead, I felt something that almost resembled relief. The truth was finally too loud to silence. The nurse handed me my phone. Notifications filled the screen, texts from colleagues, messages from strangers, reporters begging for comments. I ignored them all until I saw one name that stopped me cold, Dr. Marquez. "You're not alone. Truth is stronger than steel." My throat tightened. I typed back slowly. "He broke my ribs, not my will." Outside, the hallway buzzed with police radio chatter. When the detective entered, he was polite but firm. "Miss Whitman, we need to confirm some details." I nodded. "My brother's name is Ethan Whitman. He attacked me on stage with a steel bat. He asked if it was planned. I hesitated. Maybe not planned, but expected. I told him about the dinner, about the speech, about the years of control disguised as love. He wrote everything down. When he left, I lay back and listened to the rain starting outside, each drop tapping against the glass like a slow applause for a truth finally spoken aloud. Hours passed. The pain dulled into a deep ache. My phone kept buzzing video links, news articles, talk show invitations. The world was watching, dissecting, judging. Some comments called me brave. Others said I'd provoked him, but no one could deny what they saw. The footage didn't lie. Ethan's swing, the emblem of our company flashing in the sunlight, my body collapsing. Every frame a confession. I closed my eyes and replayed the moment not as tragedy, but as evidence. The thing about steel is it doesn't break quietly. It sings when it shatters. And that sound was echoing across every screen in America. By midnight, the hospital corridor outside my room was lined with reporters, their voices muffled through the glass. Sources confirm Whitman heir in custody. CEO Gerald Whitman refuses to comment. The family legacy under scrutiny. I could hear snippets of it, all the media feeding frenzy building like a storm. I felt oddly calm. For once, they couldn't twist the story. The cameras had caught everything. The dynasty had cracked in front of the world, and there was no going back. I drifted in and out of sleep to the hum of machines and distant thunder. Each time I woke, I felt the same truth settle deeper into me. I wasn't invisible anymore. The world saw what I had lived through, and no amount of silence could bury it again. In that realization between pain and exhaustion, I found the first real breath of freedom. The next morning, the world had already rewritten my life into headlines. I woke to the low buzz of the hospital television, the brightness of the screen cutting through the dim light of dawn. Every major network played the same footage in slow motion. Ethan stepping forward, the silver bat glinting under the Texas sun, my body folding, as if the air had been punched out of existence. The banner beneath the image read, "Whitman Family Scandal, Heir Arrested After Onstage Assault." I watched it once then again as though repetition might turn it unreal. My name was everywhere. The nurse turned off the sound gently, but the silence made it worse. Notifications filled my phone like a storm. Every social platform lit up with hashtags, #Steel and Blood, #Whitman Dynasty, #Justice for Clara. Strangers dissected my life as if it belonged to them. Some called me brave, others called me ungrateful. Many just watched for the spectacle of a powerful family collapsing. I should have felt violated. Instead, I felt exposed and strangely lighter. There was no hiding anymore. The truth had been forced into daylight. By noon, the hospital's press office was swamped. Reporters crowded the parking lot, news vans lined the street, and drones hovered near the window. My doctor drew the blinds, muttering about privacy laws. My ribs screamed each time I moved, but I refused the heavier painkillers. I wanted to stay clear, to remember everything. The detective from the previous night returned with updates. "Your brother's been charged with felony assault," he said. "The footage makes it airtight." "And my father?" I asked. His hesitation said enough. "He's refusing interviews, blaming stress and miscommunication. His legal team's already spinning it." Of course they were. The Whitmans didn't bleed, they managed. "There's something else," he continued. "We've issued a restraining order. None of your family can contact you directly until the investigation is complete." I exhaled slowly, the motion stabbing through my chest. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. When he left, I lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling tiles. My phone buzzed again, another flood of notifications. One stood out an email from Sol Edge Robotics. "We're standing behind you. Take all the time you need." The world saw what courage looks like. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears slip down my temples. Courage. That word felt too large, too clean for what I felt. This wasn't bravery. It was survival broadcast in 4K. In the afternoon, a nurse entered carrying a tablet. "There's someone who wants to speak with you," she said softly. On the screen, Dr. Marquez appeared from his office, surrounded by blueprints and parts. His face was solemn but proud. "Clara," he said, "you've done something few ever manage. You've turned pain into proof. Don't let them bury it." I knotted my throat tight. "They'll try to twist it," I said. "They'll say it was family drama, not abuse." "Then don't let them write the narrative," he replied. "Write it yourself." That night, I drafted a statement. My fingers shook as I typed, ribs aching with each breath. I was raised to believe silence was loyalty. But silence is the rust that destroys truth. What happened on that stage was not an accident. It was the cost of breaking a cycle of control. I survived, and I will not apologize for that. I didn't send it yet. I wasn't ready, but seeing the words made something inside me settle. The next day, the world moved faster. News anchors analyzed every frame of the video. Commentators debated whether my family's empire could recover. The company's PR department released a statement calling the attack a tragic misunderstanding. I almost laughed. There were no misunderstandings in that swing, only intent. Sol Edge Robotics released their own message soon after we stand with Dr. Whitman and all survivors of domestic abuse. Their post went viral, gaining millions of likes. For the first time, I wasn't just a victim, I was a symbol. but symbols come with weight. Overnight, my inbox filled with letters from strangers, women, men, even former employees of Whitman Iron and Steel telling their stories of fear control and silence. Some sent photos of bruises. Others just wrote, "Thank you for speaking out." I cried through most of them. The nurse found me that way. My phone clutched in trembling hands, the bandages around my ribs soaked in new tears. "You should rest," she said softly. "You've been through enough." "They've been through worse," I whispered. "They just didn't have cameras." By the third day, the doctors cleared me for limited movement. I walked the hallway slowly, each step careful, the IV line trailing behind me like a leash I intended to break soon. The hospital TV blared breaking news: federal regulators to review Whitman Iron and Steel's environmental record after viral assault video. The image of my father appeared grim silent, escorted by lawyers. The cracks in his empire were spreading, and this time, no amount of money could seal them. I returned to my room to find a small package waiting. No sender listed. Inside was a note. "Truth is a harder steel." Underneath lay my old notebook, the one I'd hidden years ago, the one Ethan burned a page from. Someone had saved it. The remaining pages were still intact, filled with the dates, the bruises, the small cruelties I'd documented as a teenager. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew why. It was time to finish what I started. The following morning, I met with a lawyer from a firm that specialized in whistleblower cases. Her name was Diane Lewis, and she spoke like someone who'd long stopped fearing powerful men. I told her everything: the years of control, the abuse, the company's hidden records, the environmental violations I'd overheard discussed behind closed doors. She took notes, eyes narrowing with each revelation. "If you're willing," she said finally, "we can take this federal. The FBI's been circling Whitman Steel for years. Your testimony could open the gates." "Then let's open them," I said. When she left, I sat in the quiet room, pain radiating through every breath but clarity sharper than ever. Outside, the reporters still waited, but I wasn't hiding anymore. My father built his legacy on silence. I would dismantle it with truth. That night, I asked the nurse to draw the blinds. The city lights of Houston flickered through the window, and for the first time, I didn't feel small under them. I picked up my phone and opened Twitter. I posted my statement. Within minutes, it was shared thousands of times. By midnight, millions. The comments poured in support, outrage, solidarity. A movement was beginning, one I hadn't meant to start, but one I was ready to lead. Lying there, the hum of machines steady beside me, I whispered to the empty room. "They forged me in fire, but they forgot. Steel remembers the heat that shaped it." By the end of the week, I stopped being just a victim in the public eye and became something else: a catalyst. The world wanted a story of justice, and I was determined to give them one, not because I craved attention, but because silence had already cost me too much. The police investigation expanded quickly after the video. Ethan was officially charged with felony assault, and his mugshot appeared on national television. Eyes swollen, expression hollow. My father tried to frame it as a family misunderstanding, but the damage was irreversible. Investors began to pull out of Whitman Iron and Steel, their public statements dressed in polite concern but fueled by panic. Pending internal review, they said, but everyone knew it meant the dynasty was bleeding. I stayed in the hospital for another week, my ribs still bound, working with my lawyer from the side of the bed. Diane Lewis was relentless. "We're not just building a case for assault," she told me. "We're building one for systemic abuse. They controlled you like property. That's a pattern we can prove." She laid out files and forms across the tray table, the evidence beginning to take shape. "Every word, every message, every bruise you documented, we'll need it." I told her about the notebook that had mysteriously reappeared. She flipped through it with slow precision, nodding. "This alone is a roadmap," she said. "But if you really want to bring them down, we'll need something bigger. Something that shows what kind of empire your father really runs." I remembered the whispers I'd overheard as a teenager, the late-night calls about waste disposal, the shipments labeled recycled material that never went through regulation channels. I hadn't understood it then, but now, with adult eyes, it clicked. "The company's been dumping industrial waste into the Brazos River for years," I said, quietly. I heard him brag about how the regulators were taken care of. Diane's eyebrows lifted. "You're sure? As sure as I am that he taught Ethan to hit instead of listen. She leaned back, already thinking 5 steps ahead. If we can prove environmental fraud, it stops being a family scandal, it becomes a federal crime. That night, while the hospital halls emptied and the machines beeped in rhythm with my pulse, I began compiling everything I knew. I scrolled through old emails, revisited archived voicemails, and recovered deleted files from my cloud backups. My hands trembled partly from pain, partly from fear, but each click was a small rebellion. I found one message from my father's assistant dated 3 years earlier. Reminder payments to compliance office due next quarter. Attached was an encrypted spreadsheet of transactions labeled maintenance fees. They weren't maintenance, they were bribes. Diane arranged a meeting with a contact from the FBI. 2 agents visited the hospital under the guise of routine questioning, but when they saw the documents, their expressions changed. "You understand this could expose a network of violations," one of them said. "Yes," I answered. "And it could protect people who can't fight back." They promised to handle it discreetly, but within 48 hours, news broke that federal investigators had subpoenaed Whitman Iron and Steel for environmental misconduct. My father's empire began to fracture publicly. On television, he appeared with lawyers flanking him, his once commanding voice strained. "My daughter's trauma has been exploited by those seeking to destroy our family's good name," he said. "We will cooperate fully, but we will not be defamed." The statement only made things worse. Social media erupted. "Defamed, she was nearly killed. This is what power looks like when it's threatened." #Whitman cover-up trended for days. Sol Edge Robotics issued a press release confirming that I was assisting law enforcement as a whistleblower. The tone was unapologetic. "We stand for innovation built on integrity, not intimidation." Donations flooded into domestic abuse charities under my name. I didn't ask for the attention, but I understood its power. Visibility was armor now. Still, there were nights I questioned everything. The hospital felt like a cage with white walls. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the bat descending again, the shockwave of pain, the cold face of my father watching. I'd wake, gasping, clutching my ribs, the room spinning. The nurse would rush in reminding me to breathe. Some mornings the pain felt heavier than justice ever could. But every time I considered backing down, I remembered the messages from strangers, the women in small towns, the workers from the factory, the young girls who wrote, "You made me believe I can leave too." They deserved more than my fear. When I was finally discharged, Diane drove me to her office in downtown Houston. Her walls were lined with framed verdicts, each a battle she'd already won. "We're filing your civil suit tomorrow," she said, "against your brother for assault and against your father for enabling a pattern of abuse. But the real war will be the federal case. The evidence you've given them is already moving through channels." She handed me a folder thick with copies. At the top, stamped in bold, Federal Investigation Whitman Iron and Steel Corporation. I traced the seal with my finger. It didn't feel like victory yet, more like a wound beginning to scar. A few days later, the story exploded again. The FBI raided Whitman Steel headquarters in Fort Bend County. News choppers hovered overhead as agents carried out boxes of documents. Reporters shouted questions that my father refused to answer. By evening, the footage had aired nationwide. Anchors repeated the line again and again. "The Whitman Empire faces federal investigation for corruption and environmental violations." I watched from the living room of my temporary apartment, ribs still aching beneath the bandages. When they cut to footage of my father being escorted past the cameras, he didn't look like a king anymore. He looked small-cornered, made of something brittle, pretending to be strong. Ethan's trial was scheduled for the following month. His attorney reached out to offer a settlement. I declined. "I want the truth on record," I told Diane. "No amount of money buys silence this time." The night before the arraignment, I stood by the window and looked out over the city. The skyline shimmered like a circuit board light pulsing in the dark. I thought of the factory in Texas of molten metal pouring into molds that trapped heat until it cooled into shape. My father used to say, "Steel never forgets the fire that made it." He was right, but not in the way he believed. The fire that shaped me didn't forge obedience, it forged clarity. I would carry it until every scar had purpose. As the clock struck midnight, my phone vibrated with another message from Dr. Marquez. They built weapons out of steel. You built truth. That's harder to break. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. The war wasn't over, but for the first time it was being fought in the open, and the world was watching. The first press conference after my release was held at Houston Civic Center under lights so bright they seemed to pierce through my bruises. Cameras lined every wall, microphones tangled across the table like serpents waiting to strike. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, sometimes as vengeance, sometimes as closure. But when I stepped up to the podium with my ribs still bound and my breath still shallow, it felt simpler than either. It felt like truth. I wore a plain white blouse, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what the lights required. Beside me sat Diane, calm and unreadable, and behind us a large screen frozen on the still frame that had changed everything Ethan's swing captured midair, my body collapsing. The caption read, "Evidence Exhibit A." The room quieted as I adjusted the microphone. My voice came out low, rough but steady. "They called it discipline," I said. "The law calls it assault." The words hung there sharp as the sound of metal striking stone. Flashes exploded across the room. For years, I continued, I believed silence would keep me safe. That if I stayed quiet, my family would finally see me as one of them. But silence doesn't protect you, it only protects the people who hurt you. Reporters scribbled, cameras rolled, but I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for the version of myself that used to hide bruises under long sleeves and swallow apologies for things I hadn't done. "My name is Clara Whitman," I said clearly, "and I'm no longer afraid of my own last name." A murmur spread through the audience. I saw heads nodding, people recording, some even wiping tears. I told them about the years of coercion, the intimidation, the manipulation dressed as love. I didn't spare details. I spoke of my father's empire built on silence and my brother's violence built on permission. I spoke of every woman in that company who was told to smile and stay quiet, every worker who was punished for asking questions. When I finished, Diane took over announcing that a coalition of advocacy groups had joined the case and that Sol Edge Robotics had pledged to fund a legal foundation for domestic abuse survivors. The applause that followed wasn't the polite kind. It was raw, defiant, alive. For a moment, I had to grip the podium just to steady myself against the wave of sound. Afterward, reporters swarmed me with questions. "How do you feel knowing your brother might go to prison? Do you think your father deserves to lose his company? What do you want justice to look like?" I answered the last one simply. "Justice isn't revenge," I said. "It's truth without fear." That line became the headline within hours. News anchors dissected it, talk shows replayed it, and online, thousands of people echoed it like a mantra. The world was finally listening, not because I screamed the loudest, but because I refused to stay quiet. The next day, I met with representatives from Sol Edge to discuss the foundation they wanted to build in my name. "We'll call it the Rebuild Initiative," Helena Yates said. "Dedicated to helping survivors rebuild not just their lives, but their futures." I agreed, though. Part of me still struggled with the idea of my name on anything. For so long, my name had been a weapon used against me. Now it was being repurposed, reforged. That same afternoon, my father's lawyers issued another statement claiming he was deeply saddened by recent events, but fully confident the truth would prevail. I almost laughed when I read it. The truth had already prevailed, it was just waiting for the verdict to catch up. When I returned to my apartment that evening, the city outside buzzed with the noise of 1,000 stories being rewritten. Protesters gathered outside Whitman Steel headquarters holding signs that read, "Blood doesn't excuse abuse and justice for Clara." The drone footage flooded every channel, the once proud Whitman logo looming above a sea of voices demanding accountability. Inside, my phone buzzed non-stop with messages, some from journalists, some from strangers, a few from women inside the company who wanted to testify. One message stood out. "We've been waiting years for someone to speak. Thank you for giving us permission." I didn't respond, but I stared at that line for a long time. Permission. That was what power had stolen from us, not just safety or dignity, but the belief that we were allowed to exist freely. The hearings began the following week. I sat in the courtroom, ribs still aching, while the prosecutors presented the footage. The sound of the bat striking echoed through the speakers, a reminder that justice was built on pain. Ethan sat across from me in a gray suit, his once smug confidence replaced by a blank stare. My father sat behind him expressionless, his hands folded like he was attending a business meeting instead of his family's reckoning. When they played the clip of him shouting, "She brought this on herself," a murmur rippled through the audience. Even the judge frowned. I felt no satisfaction, just a quiet release, as if air had finally returned to a room that had been locked for decades. Outside, the press called it the trial of an empire. Inside, it felt more like an exorcism. Midway through the proceedings, one of the factory's former safety inspectors testified that he had been fired for refusing to falsify reports. Another revealed the bribery documents I had uncovered. The walls around my father's legacy began to crumble piece by piece, and for once, I didn't flinch watching them fall. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with careful steps, every breath measured. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of cameras. I told them everything about the childhood lessons that taught me obedience was survival, about the first time Ethan hit me and how my father laughed instead of stopping him, about how I'd built a life outside their reach, only to have it nearly destroyed in one violent moment of control. When I finished, the prosecutor asked what I wanted to happen next. I looked at Ethan, then at my father, and said, "I want the truth to cost them as much as the lies cost me." The room was still for a long time. Then the judge nodded slowly, as if understanding that justice wasn't about balance, it was about exposure. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into cheers as the press declared the case a turning point for corporate accountability. One network anchor said, "The dynasty built on steel may finally have met a woman forged harder than its foundations." I went home that night, exhausted, my body aching, but my spirit lighter than it had been in years. The television played in the background, muted, showing images of protesters outside Whitman Steel's gates. My mother appeared briefly on one network crying during a talk show interview, saying she never imagined things would go this far. I turned it off before she could finish. Regret after silence was just noise. That evening, Diane called. "You did it?" she said simply. "They're finished." I didn't celebrate. I just looked out the window at the city lights and whispered to myself, "No, I'm finally beginning." The collapse didn't come with explosions or fire. It came with silence, the kind that follows when power runs out of people to intimidate. Within 2 weeks of the trial's conclusion, Whitman Iron and Steel's stock plummeted by 60%. The news channels that once celebrated my father's business genius now spoke of systemic corruption and decades of unchecked abuse. For years, he had controlled the narrative with money, with lawyers, with fear. Now, every headline told a different story. His empire wasn't built on strength, it was built on silence and bruises. I watched the downfall unfold from my apartment in Houston, ribs still sore but healing. The morning news showed the board of directors gathered in a tense emergency meeting. A female anchor voice, smooth but cutting, announced that Gerald Whitman had been forced to resign as CEO. Under mounting legal pressure and public outrage, Whitman Iron and Steel will be restructured under new leadership, she said. The camera cut to my father leaving the company headquarters surrounded by security. His once imposing frame looked smaller, hunched, stripped of authority. Reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. A paper cup hit the side of his car as it drove away the first act of public defiance he'd ever faced in his life. For the first time, I didn't look away. Ethan's sentencing came 2 days later. The courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and victims of domestic abuse who had followed my story since that day on stage. I sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly together. When Ethan was brought in, he didn't meet my eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something hollow. His lawyer tried to argue diminished responsibility, stress pressure, public humiliation, but the footage spoke louder than excuses. When the judge read the verdict, guilty of felony assault and aggravated battery, Ethan's shoulders sagged as if the steel he'd carried all his life had finally collapsed inside him. The sentence was 8 years. Not enough for what he'd done, but enough to mark him forever. As he was led away, he glanced at me briefly, his lips parting as though to speak. I didn't flinch. There was nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers, not cruel but cathartic. Signs waved in the air. Justice for Clara. Break the chains. I walked down the steps slowly, the sun warm against my skin, each breath easier than the last. For the first time, I wasn't walking out of a battle. I was walking into freedom. That evening, Diane came over with takeout and champagne. "You just ended a dynasty," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "How does it feel?" I stared out the window at the glittering cityscape, like I finally stepped out of a shadow I didn't know I was living in. She smiled. "You know, I've seen hundreds of cases. People think winning means revenge, but real victory is peace." "Then I guess I'm winning slowly," I said. We clinked glasses and watched the night deepen. The next morning, my phone buzzed with news alerts. My mother had given another interview, this time to a national network. In it, she cried on camera saying she'd been a victim too, that she'd stayed for survival. Viewers were divided, some believed her, others didn't. I didn't watch the full segment. Her tears didn't bring me comfort. They only reminded me how long she'd chosen silence. Later that week, a journalist from The Atlantic wrote a feature titled "The Dynasty That Collapsed Under Its Own Weight." The article traced the company's rise from a small foundry to a corporate giant, then its implosion after the assault. The final line read, "The Whitman empire fell not because of competitors or markets, but because one woman refused to be silent." Reading it felt strange. Empowering, yes, but also distant, as if they were writing about someone else. The woman they described was brave, unstoppable, fearless. The truth was, I was just tired. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was slow, painful, repetitive. Physical therapy sessions for my ribs, counseling for my nightmares, endless interviews where I repeated the same story until the words felt detached from me. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was peace in the consistency. Pain meant progress, now not punishment. Months passed. Whitman Iron and Steel was sold to an international firm at a fraction of its former value. The new management announced plans to overhaul operations and implement stricter ethical standards. Workers who had been silenced for years began to speak publicly, their testimonies echoing mine. A former factory foreman told reporters, "We all knew something was wrong, but nobody dared say it until she did." The words spread like a slow burning fire until she did. They built statues for men like my father, but legacies for women like me were made of sentences like that. I returned to Sol Edge Robotics soon after. Helena Yates met me at the door, her handshake firm, her eyes full of respect. "Ready to get back to work?" she asked. "More than ever," I said. My first project was developing a robotic brace that could assist with rib healing, a design born out of necessity and defiance. Each prototype was a small act of reclamation. Each success whispered, "You survived this and you're building something better." One afternoon, while testing the brace on a volunteer patient, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, not from pain, but from memory. The past still lived in the corners of my mind, but it no longer owned me. The fear had dulled into something else, clarity. The world had changed too. Legislation bearing my case's name, the Whitman Accountability Act, passed through Congress mandating stricter oversight for family-owned corporations and domestic violence protections for employees. I never asked for that honor, but when I watched the bill signing on television, I cried quietly. My father didn't call. He never would. Last I heard, he'd moved to a private estate in Florida, away from the headlines, living off the remnants of his fortune. The empire was gone, but the name still carried its ghost. Sometimes I wondered if he watched the news when my foundation launched another scholarship, or when a survivor I'd helped spoke out on stage. Maybe he did. Maybe he turned the volume down, but I no longer needed his acknowledgement. Power built on fear can only last until someone refuses to be afraid. The night Ethan was transferred to state prison, I sat alone by the river watching the reflection of the skyline ripple across the water. The air smelled of rain and rust. I remembered the nights I used to hear the foundry's machines roaring outside my childhood window, the endless hammering of steel. Now the only sound was the wind. For the first time, it didn't scare me. It sounded like freedom. The months after the fall of my family's empire unfolded not like a victory parade, but like the quiet rebuilding after a storm. I moved into a modest apartment overlooking the bay, small enough to feel human, but high enough to see the horizon every morning. The air smelled of salt and metal, a reminder that even in peace, remnants of the past lingered. Healing was neither linear nor cinematic. It came in fragments, waking up without panic, taking a full breath, without pain, walking past a TV, without flinching at the sight of my last name. There were days I still reached instinctively to cover the scar near my ribs as if shame could hide it, and other days I traced it with my fingertips like proof that I had endured. The media eventually moved on. The hashtags stopped trending, the outrage cooled, but the impact remained. Women from across the country wrote to me, engineers, factory workers, mothers, daughters, all saying some version of the same thing. You made me believe I can say no. I printed their letters and taped them along my office wall at Saw Edge Robotics, not as trophies, but as reminders of why I kept building. My first major project after returning to work was the development of a medical robot capable of assisting trauma patients during physical therapy. It was designed to track pain levels and adjust pressure autonomously, a machine built to understand pain and respond to it with care, something my family never learned. When the prototype worked for the first time, I stood in the lab, tears welling as the robotic arm moved gently over a test patient's side. Dr. Marquez, my old mentor, smiled at me. "You turned pain into precision," he said. "That's the best kind of engineering." Outside of work, I launched the Rebuild Foundation, with Saw Edges backing a scholarship program for women in STEM who had faced family coercion or abuse. I named the inaugural grant the No Means No Fellowship. The title alone made headlines. During the launch ceremony, I stood before an audience of young women and said, "The night my brother broke my ribs, I thought my future ended. But sometimes breaking is just the beginning of a different kind of strength." Applause filled the hall, but what struck me most was the silence afterward, the kind of silence that meant the message had landed deep. That night, I walked alone along the harbor city lights flickering across the water and whispered to myself, "They forged me with fear, but I remade myself with purpose." The foundation grew faster than I expected. Within 6 months, we had over 100 applicants and partnerships with universities across the country. Each story reminded me that survival wasn't rare, it was just underreported. One applicant wrote, "My father said women can't build machines. This scholarship will prove him wrong." I saw myself in every line. I started therapy again, not to fix what was broken, but to understand it. My therapist asked me once, "If you could say one thing to your father now, what would it be?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Nothing, I said. He taught me that silence was submission. Now silence is choice. That was when I realized I had stopped defining myself in opposition to them. My identity wasn't a rebellion anymore, it was a creation. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a national conference on innovation and ethics in engineering. The same industry that once doubted me now handed me a microphone. I began my speech with a story about a piece of flawed steel. When steel cracks under pressure, I told them it doesn't mean it failed. It means the impurities have been revealed. And once you see them, you can forge something stronger. I could feel the room listening: executives, students, engineers, every face turned toward me, not out of sympathy, but out of respect. After the event, a young intern approached me, nervous but determined. "I watched your interview last year," she said. "My dad used to hit my mom. I'm studying mechanical engineering now because of you." I placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Build something that outlasts the pain. That's the best revenge." Those moments stitched me back together far more effectively than time or therapy. Still, some nights when the city quieted and the weight of memory crept in, I found myself replaying the sound of that bat, the gasp of the crowd, the flash of cameras. It no longer made me tremble, but it reminded me how easily cruelty hides behind tradition. I used those memories like blueprints, tools to prevent others from being built on fear. Eventually, I decided to face the past one final time. I drove back to my hometown in Texas, to the old estate that once stood as a monument to the Whitman name. The gates were rusting, the sign half fallen, the foundry silent. Grass grew through cracks in the concrete. I parked the car and walked the perimeter slowly, each step heavy with ghosts. The air was thick with dust and nostalgia. In the distance, I could see the old smokestack symbols of strength that had outlived their empire. I stopped by the front door, closed my eyes, and whispered, "You no longer own me." I didn't need to go inside. The closure wasn't in seeing the ruins, it was in walking away. On my way back to Houston, I stopped at a small diner. The waitress recognized me from the news and hesitated before saying, "You're the Whitman girl, right?" I met her gaze calmly. "I used to be," I said. She smiled softly. "Well, whatever you are now, you did the right thing." That simple acknowledgement from a stranger carried more weight than any corporate apology. By the end of that year, the Rebuild Foundation expanded internationally, offering mentorship programs and engineering workshops for survivors of abuse. Sol Edge funded a research lab in my name, the Clara Whitman Center for Ethical Engineering. The irony of seeing my name in steel letters on a glass building didn't escape me. This time, the metal didn't symbolize control. It symbolized endurance. During the center's opening, Helena Yates took the stage and said, "Some families inherit legacies of wealth. Others inherit legacies of silence. Clara turned hers into a legacy of resilience." The applause thundered, but I couldn't hold back tears. When the ceremony ended, I stood outside alone as the sun set over the bay. The water glowed like molten silver. My reflection shimmered on the surface, fractured but whole. For the first time, I saw a woman who no longer needed permission to exist. I whispered to that reflection, "You're free." Months later, when the foundation reached its first anniversary, I recorded a short video message to thank our supporters. It was simple, filmed from my home office. "If you've ever been told that saying no makes you ungrateful," I said, "remember this. Boundaries don't break, families' abuse does. The moment you refuse to be controlled, you begin to rebuild." The clip went viral within days. Comments flooded in, people writing from across the world, sharing their own stories, typing justice in solidarity. Some said my words gave them courage to leave. Others said they finally understood their worth. Reading them, I realized this was the ending I had never dared to imagine. Not revenge, not redemption, but connection. The final piece of closure came quietly one spring morning when a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a short, handwritten note in shaky script. I was wrong. "I don't expect forgiveness, only that you live free." It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. My father. I folded the note, once placed it in a drawer, and didn't cry. It didn't matter if he meant it or not. I had already forgiven myself for ever needing his apology. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city and watched one of our satellites cross the sky, a small, steady light moving through darkness. Somewhere hundreds of miles above my work was orbiting the Earth, carrying signals that connected people across continents. I smiled, whispering to the stars, "You see, I didn't inherit steel. I became it." Then, in the quiet that followed, I recorded the closing voiceover for my next story. "If you believe blood doesn't excuse abuse," I said softly, "type justice in the comments and tell me where you're watching from, because every voice that speaks truth makes the world a little less silent. There's a moment in every story when the noise fades and all that's left is truth." For me, that moment came when I stopped waiting for an apology that would never arrive and realized that survival itself was the proof I needed. I built a life from the wreckage of one that tried to break me, and if you're watching this, maybe you've carried your own version of that pain. Maybe yours came in the form of silence that cut deeper than words, or expectations that smothered who you really were. Maybe it came from people who said family is everything, but forgot that respect is what makes family real. Hear me clearly now, you do not owe your peace to those who destroy it. The past doesn't own your name, and your bloodline doesn't define your worth. What defines you are the moments you stand back up after the world tries to fold you down. I know what it's like to be told that saying no is betrayal, to be made to believe that obedience is love. But the truth is, boundaries are not walls, they're bridges to freedom. The night my brother broke my ribs, I thought he broke my future. Instead, he broke the chains I'd been too afraid to see. And when I finally said no in front of the world, I didn't lose a family, I found myself. So if you're listening right now and you've ever been told to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to endure, because that's just how family is, this is your reminder. Peace built on fear is not peace at all. You have the right to choose yourself, even if it means walking away. You have the right to start over without guilt. You have the right to become your own kind of steel. Because strength isn't the absence of scars, it's carrying them like proof that you survived. So I'm asking you not as a victim, but as someone who rebuilt to make this moment count. If you believe that blood doesn't excuse abuse-type justice in the comments below, and tell me where you're watching from. Let the world see how far this message travels from coast to coast, from city to city, from one survivor to another. Because every comment, every word of solidarity is a spark in the dark for someone still trapped in silence. Are you with me in saying that dignity is not disposable, that love without respect is not love at all? Then share this story. Speak your truth. You never know who might need to hear it tonight. My name is Clara Whitman, and I was forged in pain, but I live in peace. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this: you are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become next.